Hi, I'm Tim Belcher. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to release my third full set of no stitch, no sew, no glue, no trick leather bags. And these are actually no stitch leather tote bags. This is a large, this is a medium, and this is a small, which I sort of think is the cutest of all of them. Even this large here, though, can be made on a Cricut Maker or almost any laser, including the Glowforge. This may be the biggest piece of leather you've ever had to cut on either one of those, but if you can cut these designs, you can put this entire bag together in just a few minutes. I'm also going to show you some tips and tricks I learned along the way making many of these that I don't think you've seen anywhere else. I'm going to go over my leather choices, my cost, how I designed it, everything. So no stitch leather tote bags. This is how I made it. I'm very excited about this design for several reasons. Number one, I think it's the best design I've ever released. The fit and finish of this bag is absolutely perfect. That's because I've gone through everything I do with the no-stitch design and updated it and modified it slightly. But in the end, this is a very simple design. It's a front panel, it's a back panel, and it's a bottom panel. This bottom panel's completely captured by the front and the back, and then the front and back panel simply weave up the side. You rivet on some straps and you're pretty much good to go. Hopefully by this time you're familiar with my no-stitch design. It uses CAD, it uses geometry to create a tab and slot method that uses the natural characteristics of leather. And if you can cut a design with some precision, you can simply weave two pieces or three pieces, in this case, of leather together to make a bag. Secondly, I'm excited about this design because this is the shape of a tote bag I've had in my head for quite a while. I just didn't know how to get there in Fusion 360. I didn't know how to make this shape. And it wasn't until the middle of the last video I put out, those no-stitch leather koozies, specifically that pint glass koozie, that I realized, oh, I know now how to make this shape.
If you give me just 1 minute, I'll show you how to make it. It basically starts with an ellipse at the bottom and a larger ellipse at the top. I can then simply loft those together and I have a rudimentary tote shape. I can then cut that shape in half and I'll grab that front face and make it its own body. I'll then thicken it, jump through a bunch of weird Fusion 360 hoops in order to make that front face a piece of sheet metal that I can flatten out. And what you see on the screen now is the shape of one side of that front panel. I'm then going to design a very small profile on the top and cut it out of that piece of sheet metal. I can then refold that piece of sheet metal and there's my front panel. Now I'll simply mirror it to get a good visual representation of what that tote bag will look like. Well, to me there was a problem with some of my assumptions. This is an early prototype in a cowboy leather, and when I open it you'll see the depth of it sort of splays open, pulling those angled edges in, and I really didn't like that. And even when I matched the depth to the bottom, so I had a perfectly sort of straight bag in CAD, the leather still took over, splayed open, and pulled those edges in too much. So after many prototypes, it wasn't until this design where I started to make the depth of the bag actually narrower at the top in CAD that I could counteract some of that natural sort of spring back in the design. Now, of course, there's a lot more complexity to the no-stitch tab and slot design, but I'll save that for maybe a later video.
Before I show you some of my finished designs, let me show you a late prototype because I think this is the point in the design where several changes happened and I started doing some things that you might not have seen before on this channel. This is made out of Weaver leather. Now, I'm going to say Weaver a lot. That's where I buy my leather. I'm not sponsored by them, but I would very much like to be, Weaver, if you're watching. This is actually Sao Paulo leather. It comes dyed on one side. The black's actually dyed on the front and the back, but all the other colors are only dyed on the front. And this is in cactus green. It's very thin but stiff leather, 3 to 4 ounces, closer to 3, I would guess, somewhere around 1.1, 1.2 millimeters thick. And the bag itself is absolutely, I think, great, perfect. You use this, it's very light, but it is definitely genuine leather. At this point in the design, though, I had integrated straps. They sort of weave through the front and back and are secured by a single rivet. And as I hold this, the straps feel too thin. See, this design presupposed as I was cutting these holes that I was going to use the same thickness for the straps as I did the bag. And on this particularly thin bag, when I hold this, it feels a bit like cardboard. The straps need to be thicker. So I think this bag is a little bit ruined. Now, I'm not going to actually release these heart straps. I think they're very cool. It's just something I designed. I have simple plain straps in the pack. You can customize those however you want. Now, I mentioned that this was thin but stiff leather. Let's talk about that for a second, because I realize I say that a lot and you may not know what I'm talking about. Here's a section of that Sao Paulo leather in red and a section of exactly this in cactus green, a cutoff. And you can see that's sort of stiff. It holds its shape even though it's fairly thin. This is thicker, 4 to 5 ounce leather in brown, and it's what I made my Savannah series out of, this in the same leather in blue jean color. And that's not stiff, it's very, very soft. Now, when you buy leather online, sometimes it's hard to tell how stiff the leather is. You have to look at the descriptions and the words and sort of infer it. Not this one. This one actually said it was fairly soft. And this on the Savannah series was probably too soft. If it's too soft, my tab and slots can be yanked apart at the top. And on some of those Savannah bags I made my wife, that top tab would sometimes unseat and I'd have to go seat it. That's one of the things I fixed in this design. Now, everywhere I put a tab and a slot in the actual CAD model, I have a place where I can insert a rivet right into the tabs. And on this design, just the very top 2 tabs have rivet holes, or places where you need to put a rivet to secure it. And once that's in place, this design is very, very strong. It's going to hold anything at all you absolutely need to put in a tote bag. You could put metal weights in here and it wouldn't fall apart. It wouldn't break before the actual straps do. So the second thing with this bag is that it came dyed, as I mentioned, only on one side, which means I needed to dye the back of that leather. And I never only dyed one side of leather before. Usually if you watch me on my channel, I'm going to spray one side, flip it, spray it with the same color. This is going to be a little bit different. In order to spray just the back and make sure I didn't get any dye on the front, I needed my leather flat. And a lot of these tips in this video are going to come with needing your leather flat. So how do I flatten my leather? It comes in rolls. Sometimes there's creases, sometimes there's wrinkles. It's really, really simple. All you do, cut your panel out, spray it gently on the back with water. I don't soak it, just spray it gently. Lay it on the counter, and I place my cutting mat over it. If I have a bunch of panels cut, I'll spray each one and separate them with some paper towels, lay the cutting mat on top of all of them, and 4 hours later, 8 hours later, I have flat panels. So once I had my flat panels with this leather, I was able to simply put it on some packing paper, and now I'm going to spray the back of it and never touch the leather. I'm actually going to spin it 4 times by using the paper only so the leather doesn't move. And that ensures that I don't get dye on the front panel and I can dye simply only the back. So before I get away from this prototype, I wanted one more time to mention that this was Weaver leather, Sao Paulo pre-dyed, 3 to 4 ounce. This is about $90 for a double shoulder, but this double shoulder is sort of small, only about 11 square feet. From that, I can get a large, a medium, and a small if I'm careful about how I cut that up. So that probably means I could get 4, maybe 5 smalls. I could definitely get 2.5, almost 3 mediums, 2 larges with some left over. Again, very inexpensive in terms of pre-dyed leather, but only about 11 square feet. Next, let's talk about these yellow and brown bags that I made. This is made from undyed Veg Tan leather, actually the V-cut double shoulder from Weaver in 5 to 6 ounce. And if you ask me, 5 to 6 ounce is sort of the sweet spot for this bag. The bag itself holds its shape really well. The handles feel great. The whole bag feels sort of luxurious. What I was able to do, though, is build on the same principle from that green bag where I was dyeing one side and dye each side of this leather a different color. I was able to flatten my panels, put it on paper and lay the yellow down, wait for a little bit, put it on new paper and lay the brown down. And that gave me a 2-color bag that I really, really like. The handles here are made in that same dark brown, 5 to 6 ounce. They feel absolutely perfect. Now, in terms of the leather here, that V-cut double shoulder cost $140 and it was not dyed. However, that was about 17 square feet. If you do the math, it's somewhere around the same price. I don't understand why pre-dyed leather sometimes is almost less expensive than natural leather you have to dye yourself. But in the end, I really, really like these dual color dyed bags. So now let's look at my favorite series, the red series that I made. And I did several things different with these bags. This is back to that Sao Paulo leather in 3 to 4 ounce, so still thin, in red this time. You'll see I finished this red with Resin several coats, and it came out almost like patent leather. This is that same leather in medium, just with leather balm, and you'll see it has a different finish, but still very, very attractive. And the small in this is actually done the same way the large is, very, very shiny. Now, because the leather was so thin, I wanted to line it. I wanted to thicken it. And for this one and the small, I thickened it using cowhide suede. Now, the outside of this is cowhide. The other side of the finished leather is suede. Why did I need to thicken it? Well, again, stiff leather, the inside of that was undyed, not colored. And the cowhide suede that you buy from Weaver for $60 or so comes about 7 or 8 square feet, is actually very, very soft and very luxurious. Now, I know you can combine pieces of leather. You could back 2 pieces of leather or glue them together using barge cement. I've seen people painstakingly take a panel of leather and paint barge cement all the way up to the edges, always afraid that they're going to get glue on the table that transfers to the face and ruin it. And to me, that entire process looks laborious and just terrible. It just seems like a nightmare to me, and I don't want to do that. But I've always had this thought in the back of my head that maybe you could use some of those Spray 3M products, specifically Spray 90. That's their version of spray contact cement. And I searched all over the place, and I found a bunch of people using it for headliners and small leather projects, but nobody would stand up and say, yeah, that actually works to put 2 pieces of leather together. So I tried it, and yeah, I'll stand up and say, it works. I was able to build on the same process I was using for painting double sides. I flattened my panels. I took the finished sides of both the suede and the actual leather, put them face down, made sure that there was no gaps, and I was able to take 3M spray and line both backs at once. Now, I started by putting 2 coats on. I found out later that I really only need 1 coat with full coverage. And after I finished the second panel, I waited 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then I was able to press those together. Once I pressed them together, I used a braying tool to put a slight amount of pressure to make sure they stuck, and then I let them sit for 5 or 10 minutes. At that point, I brought them in and was able to trim the panel and give it a good braying to make sure they stayed together. So let me mention a couple of things about that Spray 90 process that I think are important. I found after a couple of hours, I could still, with effort, pull the 2 pieces of leather apart. But after a full 24-hour cure, I could not. This is my wife's favorite bag, my favorite bag. She's been using it for weeks. She carries all sorts of stuff in it. Not only did I cut the design and I wiped the edges aggressively and I assembled the bag, she's been using this, putting all sorts of stuff in it. She doesn't necessarily treat it well. And there's absolutely no separation and no ability to get separation at a corner. I call this permanent. Secondly, the Spray 90 says it's low VOC. It didn't used to be low VOC. It used to be absolutely horrible to spray the stuff. Now I find when I spray it initially, the fumes actually don't bother me. But over the course of that 24-hour curing, it off-gases a lot. So what I do with mine is I actually put it back into my laser and turn my ventilation on in its lowest setting for about 24 hours and let it off-gas out of the house. Just let it off-gas somewhere that you have air moving in your garage or something. Certainly don't do it in your house. But after 24 hours, those panels are permanently fused together. This is also a good time to talk about some of the changes to my no-stitch pattern. As I show you inside this bag, you'll see that there's no more triangles. The triangles are actually still there for the mathematics involved in making the tab and slot, but I found that adding that curve makes it not only prettier, but makes it somewhat easier to set these tabs. And again, as I mentioned, on the top, tab only. On each side, there's a single rivet hole. Well, if you remember from my Savannah series, this is the same hardware I use to attach those straps, and it attaches with a simple screw. I've actually been including these instead of a rivet in that top hole, and that allows me to do things like attach a keychain holder or keys to each side of the bag. Let me show you the medium here, because this has yet another option. Again, this is done in just leather balm, flatter finish, but still very, very luxurious feeling with the liner. But for this one, instead of cowhide suede, I used pig suede. Pig suede has one side that's just a slight amount more finished. It's not finished, but you get the idea. And one side rougher. I used the rough side to bound to the suede side of the leather using the exact same 3M process. And now the inside of this bag looks a little bit like a football. Sort of surprised me that pigskin looks like pigskin, but it does. Actually very, very soft, very luxurious feel to this one as well.
One other option, this one's in that cactus green, this time with Resolene, so shiny, but on the inside I actually lined it with a goat skin. Very, very thin, but very soft. Great Cricut option and an easy way to thicken that leather up.
I've got one more bag to show you. This is actually that same leather I used on the Savannah series, that brown and blue jean color. Very soft leather, as I mentioned before. And this is what the bag looks like in terms of a soft leather. Just a bit more comfortable to carry. My wife actually likes the soft bags as well as the stiffer bags. Now, previously, I would have been very worried about that seam along the side and specifically that top tab coming unseated. But again, now we have a rivet hole here. In this case, I've used those screw-on D-rings. The strength of this bag overall, because the bottom is still captured completely, there is no starting or end point. There is no weak point in the tab and slot design. This bag would carry absolutely anything you threw in it. And again, I think the straps would probably give away with those rivets before the actual no-stitch design did. So another thing, I've been very, very impressed with people that made my designs, made them better than I ever have. Some of those included buying their own straps or creating their own straps. I wanted to give you that option on this bag too. So for the small and the large and the medium, you'll find these D-ring straps. Now this is a short piece of leather with the whole pattern correct so that you can actually put this onto the bag, rivet it instead of the straps with a D-ring, and then either buy or create your own straps that may hook onto the bag. So again, just another option for creativity. I want to show you a couple of these builds start to finish, and this won't take long.
I'm going to show you two bags assembled here. First, just a couple of panels cut out on the X-Tool P2 CO2 laser. Great large bed, easy to cut this leather. And remember, I have an entire series of no-stitch design videos on my channel. For a lot more detail, a lot more in-depth overview of the process, please check that playlist out. But these panels go together only one way. They only fit together one way. There's more tabs on one side of that bottom panel than the other, and that helps you easily align that bottom panel to either the front or the back panel. And I'm going finished side over finished side, and I'm seating one of these tabs at an angle and getting it halfway or so into the slot. And then I'm pulling that tab with a twisting motion fully through the slot to seat it. And you'll notice on this bag I'm using a pair of pliers to often seat those tabs. That's because the back of this leather was rough and I was putting several together, so I don't want my thumbs to hurt at the end of the process. I probably should have done this part before I even started assembling the bag, but now I'm going to put the straps on. Simply 3 rivets on each side of the strap. I use rivets that can be started by hand, and then I will simply seat them with a few hard blows of the mallet. On these yellow bags, I actually used a magnetic snap, and you've seen me use those before. I actually don't think, after doing this, that a magnetic snap is correct for this. A magnetic snap is best used putting 2 flat pieces of leather together, not necessarily trying to hold the top of a bag that naturally wants to open. I just don't think they have enough strength for that. Now I'm simply going to attach that other side. Now you'll see me get to a point where I realize it's just easier to work from the inside of the bag and seat these tabs. And again, that second side goes on very, very quickly, and then I can simply form the bag to shape. Now this tab, the lowest tab on the sides, is going to be the hardest to seat. You sort of got to form the bag as you do it. Just take your time, get it started, and feel free to use a tool to seat it. And while I'm doing that first tab, I'm going to do that first tab on the other side as well. Now I'm simply going to seat those tabs all the way up one side of the bag and then the other. And that's the bag pretty much done. The last thing you need to do is set 2 rivets on the top of each side of the bag. You may have to put the bag on the corner of a table or position it somehow to get an anvil inside to set that rivet. Again, as I mentioned, I use those screw-in D-rings. I have to widen the hole a little bit with an awl. I use an ice pick from Jimmy DiResta, but here's the bag. And again, I think the end result of this is pretty fantastic. And now let's look at one of those red series. I'm going to go through this one a little bit quicker than I did the yellow. And I really wish there was some way to convey how soft and how luxurious the inside of these bags feel. This time I'm going to remember to put the straps on first. Now these panels were thicker than the yellow bags, and that required longer rivets. I order rivets in all sorts of sizes, and depending on what I need, I simply try different lengths. You want the rivet to just barely poke out of the panel, and that's the correct length for setting a rivet. And on this red series, I'm actually going to put just a large actual snap for the closure, and I think that's a better option. Again, everything I use, links will be in the description down below. And assembly is essentially the same. This bag was much softer than the last inside, and while I still do use those pliers, a lot of this bag was simply assembled by hand. So as you watch me assemble this bag, I do want to say this. I take great pride and a lot of joy in making complex projects easy and simple to put together. This one in particular is a very luxurious bag that is a no stitch and no dye leather tote bag. It really can't get much easier than this. And this really is, if you have a Cricut or a laser, a beginning leather project. And maybe one of the easiest beginning leather projects I've ever seen. And for all you Cricut people out there, I'm going to link to a full purse that I made on the Cricut. This time the only difference, I'm going to apply that contact paper on the leather first. That's a trick I got from some YouTube video. I'm going to trim that and then trim about 3/4 of an inch off of this 12-inch wide panel. And that's going to give me sort of a temporary mat to protect my mat from all the rough side of that leather. I'm going to braid that down very well. Then I'm simply going to put the SVG into Design Space, size it correctly, and hit go. Now this is about a 5-ounce piece of leather. I chose 5 to 6 ounce tooling leather, and this took me about an hour and a half.
And lastly, let's talk about the lining one more time, because I wanted to mention that the cowhide suede, the pig suede, and the goat skin, a lot of the specialty leathers you'll find that would make good linings are chrome tan leather. Now, for you laser guys, chrome tan leather seems like a big no-no. Very common, someone will ask for tips on leather, and Captain Safety Pants will jump in really quick and say, just stick with Veg Tan because chrome tan will kill you. It's poisonous. That's not true anymore. Decades ago, the way we chrome tan leather around the world produced something called hexavalent chromium. Hexavalent chromium is a carcinogen. If you ever seen the movie Aaron Brockovich where that entire town was poisoned, they were poisoned with hexavalent chromium. For decades, chrome tanneries have moved away from that and they don't use that methodology anymore. Modern chrome tan leathers are considered scientifically safe to laser, although I would say that the research is fairly light. Modern chrome tans do produce trivalent chromium. There is some research that says trivalent chromium is not a carcinogen, and again, it is safe to laser, and many people around the world do laser chrome tan. I do. It's my personal choice. I won't cut it on the X-Tool P2, by the way, because while that ventilation system is good, I don't think it's great, and it turns off when it's finished. I will put it on my OM-Tech, and I'll run that ventilation system for 10 or 20 minutes after I cut chrome tan to make sure it's gotten everything out of the room. And when I take that out of the laser, I'll immediately wipe the edges because I don't want soot falling off or getting into the air. I'll wipe it with a damp cloth, and then I'll wash my hands. That's the way I handle chrome tan leather when I laser it. All those choices are up to you. Just realize that nothing we cut on a laser is good for us. It's not like we're lasering balsa wood or plywood and sitting there breathing it in going, wow, all this vitamin D is great for me. Nothing you laser is good for you. However, some things are very bad for you, carcinogens and poison and chlorine gas and things like that. So let's talk about price for a minute. As I mentioned on the yellow and brown ones, I spent about $140 on a V-neck double shoulder, about 17 square feet. And that would have done 3 larges, maybe 4 mediums, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 smalls. I have no idea. I'm going to do some conservative math. I'm not going to give you the price of what it costs me and everything to get a bag, but per bag, the large one of the yellow and brown would have been about $56. I think the medium would have been somewhere around $43 to $45, and the small maybe $25. And again, that includes the straps, the hardware, the die for this one. So again, I think for a full leather tote, very affordable in terms of making it. Now on to these, which I think, again, feel heavier, feel more luxurious with that lining, just all around a better bag. Again, the Sao Paulo leather was about $93 for about 11 square feet, and the cowhide suede here was about $56. Again, I could get multiple bags out of it. My rough math says that this lined bag with the straps and hardware, somewhere around $80 for the large. For the medium, I would guess somewhere around $65. And for the small, somewhere around $40. Fully lined, finished, ready to go. Well, it really is that simple. These are very easy to put together once you've cut them out. Everything is live on Etsy. And if you've stuck around this long, I want to give you a special thank you. If you use the promo code IWATCHED, all one word, IWATCHED, it'll give you 30% off anything in my store. I'm not going to put that in the description. That's just for you guys that stuck around this long to watch. I really, really appreciate it. Everything that I referenced in this video, links are in the description down below. Some of them are affiliate links. Some of them are just the things I really like to use. And some of them are just links to other videos and more information. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like, hit that subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.